So, Suzanne, you mentioned that there are 9 levels of ego development. So, can you please share a brief overview of what these 9 levels are and what are their characteristics?
If we can now show that arc image, that would
Yeah,
be helpful. Can you?
sure.
So ego development theory we understand to be like an arc, where in the first 4 stages, I'm only showing 8 here because the very early stages are for people who really can't lead adult lives. They're the ones who are in protective care in institutions very early, who are not developed. But then the first that we see is the self-centric. Oh, what happened there? And it is a stage that we know from sort of despots, authoritarian people, people who only see what others for what they can give them, how they can be used. They have no real sense of responsibility towards others, no real sense of shame or any of that. They just do what they want. And amazingly we know many leaders, world leaders, who are making sense that way. And it's of great concern because really they can be very destructive, even as leaders in a business. But thank goodness the statistics show no more than like 5% are at this level in the sort of professional realm.
Mm-hmm.
Still, that's quite a few people when you think how many billion people we have. And what's happening in the first half is people develop a separate self-identity. More and more at the group-centric, they now actually can play in what we call the sandbox. The self-centric cannot. They will just take your bucket and your stuff and just do what they want. Here they learn how to cooperate, like we all do in grade school. You have to learn to wait your turn. You have to learn to, do all kinds of things together. Mm. What's missing in terms of ego development is a separate self. Your self is that of what your group, your Bible tells you, the religious document says, your priests and your parents say that is who you are. And anybody who is not like that, guess what? They're enemies. Mm-hmm. They're out to get us. You have to defend against them. You have to at least defend against them, if not destroy them, because they're a real challenge to who we are at the heart, at the bottom of things, not superficially. Mm-hmm. And of course, you also like to look like everybody else. You like to have the same things as your neighbors. That's all part of this level. But it's sensitive to others, which is really different than the stage before. And then there's a big shift from 3 to 3-4, because now we can actually, or at least what we say in ego development theory, that's when the separate self awakens. It becomes, you're starting to say, oh, I'm not like my parents. Mm-hmm. I don't like this anymore. I'm my own person. I'm special. And generally people learn something and then they're becoming good at it. And they identify with that. And we call that the expert or the skill-centric stage. Mostly expert in the business world. Mm-hmm. Somebody who is often very good at something, could be making beds, could be in technology, could be anywhere, but they identify with that. So what do you think happens if you challenge them? They start defending. They always have the last word. They always know better. And they don't like to be challenged because the challenge is not about a specific thing. It's about them. They feel challenged as a whole person. And of course, that is an issue when you are so personalize everything. And the next stage is the stage that in most Western countries is considered the adult stage. Mm-hmm. Now you have that independent self. You can, if you read it there, you notice more pieces of the puzzle. You can put them together. You know more and you can do more. You can predict, measure, and explain. So it's also the general basic scientific model of understanding reality. You can look at patterns. You can create theories about all sorts of things. because you can see or you think you can see the patterns. And you start to look ahead. Planning is a big thing in this thing, creating goals and reaching goals. And you can look back and also understand yourself a bit in terms of, I was like that when I was in my 20s, but now I look at life this way. I have changed. Before, change is not really part of a person's awareness. And it's a powerful stage. We have so much of modern world, including prescribing meds, can come from this place because it was created from this mindset, the scientific mindset, testing, experimenting, looking at data, making conclusions. All of that is really well developed here. And the sense of power, a sense of self that is separate. I'm the master of my destiny would be something a person might write at this level. Who are you? I'm the real sense of separate self. And of course, that's from other perspectives, a total illusion. For one, no human being would even survive if not others cared for it when it was a newborn, a baby. And all along, there's so many other influences of why we prosper or don't, why we get ill, how we get help. All of this has nothing to do with my sense of what I have accomplished. And the shift, and that's a huge shift from the first part to the second, is becoming aware of the context that influences who I am. And if you look at the numbers there, 80 to 85% are conventional, what we call conventional meaning makers. And only a small part is post-conventional, and it gets fewer and fewer as we move across the stages. So the stage 4, 5 is the first that realizes the context, that realizes that other people have their own stories and that mine is just a story that I'm telling because all the things that have brought me to where I am. And now I realize that and respect other people's stories. I say, oh yes, of course, they make different sense than I do, but theirs is as valid as mine. I can't say you're wrong. And in businesses, you get the problem of consensus is very important. We're all agreeing that we're disagreeing. And of course, that also leads to kind of paralysis, because if everybody's story is equally valid, then who can make a decision for a group? You can't step back and say, well, this is a good argument and this isn't, because that would mean I'm taking myself as more than the rest. So it is a very interesting place to be, and yet often that's exactly where we see the movement happening between 4 and 4, 5. People middle-aged or a little later say, I've been part of this rat race. I've gone after achievement and achievement. But so what? Isn't there anything else? Perhaps they have joined a yoga class, or perhaps they take some mindfulness exercises, or partake in a religious context that offers something else, that says there's more than that to life, than the rat race, than achieving whatever. And so they're starting to explore further. They also, at this level, people start to look at their dreams. They look at their fantasizing, daydreaming. All of it is the information about life, not just rationally, objectively, what you can see outside. So the shift is also from merely objective to objective and subjective. That's a big shift. And also that, of course, means from outside to inside. Not that earlier stages also can't have, sense of insight. But here it becomes very important to make that distinction and to explore, starting to explore what's inside. I don't no longer need to predict, because the here and now is more interesting than whatever in the future. And if we work with people in business who just made that stage, they sometimes reject everything that went before. And then you have to reintroduce them that it's both, and you need both some skills, you need some goal-centric things you have to do in life, or you can't support yourself. And you can also develop all the other parts of you that so far have been neglected. And the next stage, what we call self-actualizing, is the one which now realizes that they themselves have come through all those stages. They're still there. I can still react really angry at somebody, or I can, in an argument, I can really try to win it. I know better than you. The difference is now I'm aware that I'm doing that. And I can hold back, or I can, I can self-manage that. Not that we don't still do it, it's just that I have ways to be aware of it. So what also increases is awareness. The person has more and more awareness of their inner life and their patterns of behavior, and the good ones and the bad ones. So if they discover something like that, they're also most likely to seek help and say, oh, I need a third person. I need a perspective on me that I can create by myself. People at this level have a much broader embrace. They look at historical precedent. They're concerned about the future generations, not just about immediate context, but further out in always. And they can relate to many more people because they know I've been a self-determining person at some point. I know at times I may even act group-centrically. When I go home for Christmas, and my family is very conservative and very clear in their beliefs, I behave. I don't rattle the cage. It's kind to then just keep your own ideas to yourself. So I behave group-centrically, but in my consciousness, I'm not group-centric. It's a choice, a behavioral choice I have. At the later stages, I have way more choice in how I want to behave. I may even have to be reacting very, very strongly to a self-centric person. And when I really put my fist down and say, no, no further, this is not okay, and deal out punishment or whatever is necessary. Before people are afraid of that, because they can't move around yet. From here we can. And then the next level is really the hardest, and the fewest people get there. It's becoming aware of that we all tell stories, that even developmental theories are wonderful stories. Science is a story. The famous E.O. Wilson once said, and I loved it when he said it was, science is the greatest myth of them all. Becoming aware of that does not diminish the power of these things. It doesn't throw them out. It just says, have some perspective on it. Not everything. And that's, at the moment, sort of my task in my field of adult development, is to point out, there are other cosmologies than the Western one, the weird one. There are other, and that has equal value. We just don't understand it yet enough. But to say this primitive is just truly, truly morally wrong. At the construct aware stage, you also can be quite vulnerable, because I used to get clients who were at this level, and they came and said, what shall I do? Nobody understands me. I'm confused. Am I just inventing everything, or is there really something to being at this way of being where everything is ambivalent? There's no truth you can find, because as soon as you find what you think is a truth, you have to deconstruct it. You have to take it apart and say, hey, no, there is this other thing that influences it. So you're kind of in limbo. At stage 4, 5, you still believe there is a truth. It's just a complex thing that we can figure out. Here you say, it seems like it's moving with every day, with every breath. reality is changing. And what we also see is that the later the stage, the more likely you have moments when you watch your own thinking, where you transcend, where you're suddenly in a different place, in a different state. And so you start to be more and more interested in those other states because they seem to give you some hold that was missing at this level. This kind of total relativistic place is hard to be in. I'm both how shall we say it? I'm both a nothing compared to the universe, and I'm a universe compared to nothingness. Mm-hmm. That insight, and to live in that tension, that is not easy. But people manage at some point. I know people who have lived there for a long time. That's okay too. But sometimes they also then transcend that place. And what it does in ego development theory, at least, it becomes kindly towards the fact that ego can do no other. It has to tell a story. That's its function. So I say, okay, be quiet. Don't bark every time something comes up. I know you're doing this because you want me to feel permanent and important, but it is not the truth. It's not the reality. In reality, everything is in flux. Every moment I perceive so many influences to all my senses. It is not stable. It's not a thing that I can describe. Even myself, I'm in flux as well. And we call that unitive. Mm. And in terms of theory, I did not have data. Mm-hmm. And I don't think other people don't have it either. That would give us the data to make the distinctions. And for that one would need, I told you, it took me 15 years to get enough data to come here. Mm-hmm. I don't know where you would get that data to. Of course, there are Eastern traditions, Vedantic, and they're top down. They start out with the undifferentiated, the unity consciousness, and then it's a particularization downwards toward the concrete. And Western developmental theories are bottom up. Mm. But to confuse the two, to me, one has to be very careful not to do that. And to just adopt some of the Eastern ideas and, put them on top of ego development. Anyway, that's the short of it. It is a movement from very simple being to quite wise and perceptive and tolerant and all-embracing. Yeah. And if you want to, you can draw it as I call the cosmic egg. There's the evolution and there is the involution back to the beginning.
Wow. Yeah. So, Suzanne, that was absolutely fascinating and enlightening, the model which you shared. And as you were describing the stages, I could see myself in those stages. Like when I look back at my life, I could realize that I was at this stage at this particular time and I had this specific thoughts, but I did not realize that I was at this particular stage. So, like, this model is absolutely amazing and fascinating.